Good morning and welcome to Rising, everyone's favorite riser. Emily Jashinsky's back with me in the studio this morning. Emily, good to have you back.
It's good to be back. You're far too kind, Ryan.
It's true.
He's just reading the teleprompter.
Teleprompter says that it must be true. We have an all-star lineup this Wednesday. Emily, who do we have?
We've got Michael Starr Hopkins and Alyssa Farah, who are going to join us to weigh in on the Southwest Airlines fiasco, and they're going to talk about how the White House is responding to those delays as well. Plus, Brianna Joy Gray is with us to discuss Biden's falling approval ratings among black voters, and our friends Kim Iverson and Robbie Suave will join us later as well.
But first, reporting by The Intercept reveals a 4,000-plus entry list that contains hundreds of bands, hospitals, TV stations, politicians, and armed groups viewed as dangerous by the U.S. and its allies. Over 1,000 names on the list are from the U.S. government's specially designated global terrorist list created by the Bush administration following 9/11. Critics say applying a U.S.-centric idea of danger to nearly 3 billion people could be serious. According to Sam Biddle, the terrorism category, which makes up almost 50% of the list, is almost entirely Muslim, South Asian, and Middle Eastern people and organizations. Armed right-wing militias in the U.S. are placed in a far more permissive third tier, subject to the lightest restrictions.
Now, last year, Facebook banned 2 anti-capitalist media organizations. So according to the list itself, both of these groups are internally designated as, quote, armed militias, inexplicably. Facebook, of course, provided no explanation of that designation either. Internal policy language also shows that Facebook has a specific carve-out for violent incitement, quote, against locations no smaller than a village. Sam Biddle notes that it seems inconsistent that Facebook subjects thousands of alleged foreign terrorists to its harshest speech restrictions, while also saying it's okay to advocate for violence against a country or government or city so long as it's not smaller than a village. Ryan, what do you think about the smaller than a village part in particular?
Well, it's funny because it goes to the idea of what is legitimate violence and who is able to carry out legitimate violence. And so, on the one hand, if you are a government or you're speaking on behalf of a political party that is in good standing, let's say you're the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and you say the United States should go to war against China, the United States should, go bomb Afghanistan or bomb France.
Right.
Like, that's okay. You're allowed to say that. War is what makes the world go around. If you are, here's the interesting question, if you're now the Taliban and you become the recognized government of Afghanistan, can you then advocate violence against other countries?
Right.
I mean, presumably, according to these rules, you would be able to.
Right.
Because country-on-country violence, totally legitimate and acceptable.
Right.
But if you're a non-state actor and you're advocating violence against a particular area, like this or a small town, or an individual person, or if you're a terrorist group that's advocating violence against bigger countries, and you're not a state actor yet, then that is banned. And you get into these funny, weird distinctions because we have built into our Constitution, what does it say? A well-regulated militia being essential to the protection of freedoms.
Right.
The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So well-regulated militias are right there in the Constitution, but they're not allowed to post. Now, there's no posting right in the Bill of Rights, though if it were rewritten now by Texas Republicans, you'd probably get a posting Bill of Rights, poster's Bill of Rights. So
Ryan and I were scrolling through the list of organizations itself, the 4,000-person organization list, and there are a lot of local militias, and it's sort of hard to determine which of these designations are objectionable because you'd have to sort of know the granular local details, and the people I don't trust to sort that out for us at this point are sitting at Facebook's headquarters or wherever else they're working from, and a lot of them, there was one that was like the Pulaski County well-regulated militia. Right. They put well-regulated in the name.
Well-regulated is right there in the name.
It's right there.
They wouldn't lie.
They wouldn't lie. And we don't know. Again, like, it's hard for us to understand what is actually objectionable. But the point is, the only place I can go from here is the 30,000-foot view, which is thinking about Mark Zuckerberg in a dorm in Cambridge in the early aughts, coming up with a way basically for people to like scroll through pictures and to post on their walls. This is his new hot or not list. Yeah, his new hot or not list is the militia one.
Alexa Brigade.
But not hot. But it does get to this question of like, it's not a question. It gets to the point of Facebook is not equipped to do all of the things that it now wants to do. So as soon as it starts drawing lines about, you have this company that is in some ways, impossible to see as anything but a common carrier. This is like a telecom giant, and those sort of designations don't exactly apply to it, but you have something on that level that is being run by, oligarchs in Silicon Valley who are not equipped to, if they want to start drawing lines about policing free speech in this country, they don't have the ability, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the competence, they don't have the sense of responsibility, they don't even want to do it. They themselves don't want to do it. There's some people, like I'm sure Haugen would love to be able to do it, as she sort of implied in her congressional testimony. But Mark Zuckerberg created something that has spiraled so out of control that now they're having these ridiculous ban lists.
Right, and any system that you try to layer on top of the system that they have now is going to be infused with the values of that underlying system. So whether you have an algorithm where AI is injecting racism into its decision making, or you have humans who are going through, they're going to be influenced by the underlying biases of the day, and you see that in this list with. Most of these organizations, you'd be like, yeah, okay, that's a terrorist group. Like, yeah. I get it. I see why they shouldn't be posting on Facebook. Yet, you do see a much finer tooth comb taken to a lot of these Middle Eastern, South Asian groups whose position on the political spectrum in the area, whose approach toward violence, toward state-sponsored terrorism, might be even more moderate than, say, some in Europe or in the United States, but the Muslim ones are going to be much more likely to get thrown onto that list. Maybe they all belong on the list, maybe none belong on the list, but it does show who's making these decisions is a real question, and it shouldn't take Sam Biddle obtaining this list for us to get some insight into what this decision-making is. Well,
and to your point, they are also going to increasingly be colluding with our increasingly surveillance-happy government. And that's
they drew straight from the list, which makes sense, because if you're Facebook and you're in the conference room, you're like, well, how do we start? Like, well, isn't there a terror watch list?
Yeah.
Like, go get that.
Yeah.
And let's start there.
Right.
And now people who shouldn't be on that are now on extra lists.
Exactly. And you're going to start seeing this happen, like after sort of Patriot Act, after 9/11, you saw this happen to a lot of Muslim groups. We're now seeing it happen to a lot of far-right groups, quote, far-right groups, which again, it's hard to sort of parse
Even
through.
well-regulated ones.
Even the well-regulated, or the purportedly, the self-identified well-regulated ones. But your point about the Taliban is kind of an interesting one, because it's exactly what Facebook and Twitter slammed head first into with Donald Trump. They tried to apply these like rules of conduct on their platform, and they had them, and they were preventing people from debating like transgenderism and whatever it is in a way that really stifled speech. And then finally they used them for the president of the United States. And so it's just, there's no way to come up with standards that are going to consistently actually make sense in practice. So they're just completely out of their depth, which we've known for years now, but it continues, like they dig themselves deeper and deeper into the hole as they try to fix it. And actually CNN is reporting that Facebook has another whistleblower on its hands right now. Sophie Zhang said she felt like she had blood on her hands after working at the company, and has passed documentation about the company to a U.S. law enforcement agency. Zhang, who worked as a data scientist for almost 3 years and was fired because of performance issues, she's now in an interview with CNN saying she found repressive governments around the world using Facebook to achieve influence and control. Let's take a look at that.
The fact that multiple national governments and presidents felt the need to exploit Facebook on vast scales to manipulate their own citizenry without even trying to hide, that speaks volumes about how important they believed it to be, how important it actually is.
So I'm not being glib, but this is almost as though we have a situation where it's like you have world leaders using TV to crack down in sort of authoritarian ways. You have them using radio to crack down in sort of authoritarian ways. Paper, whatever it is, Facebook is now on that level of technology where it facilitates political activity. It facilitates speech. And Mark Zuckerberg and people who work for him don't want to have that blood on their hands because they don't yet recognize the product that they've created as something as powerful and I think life-changing or like changing for everyday life as it is. I don't know, is that comparison too far, Ryan? At this point, it seems hard to avoid.
Not exactly. And so a number of lawmakers are now pushing forward with ideas of how to regulate the algorithm, which might seem off to people at first, but it actually flows pretty easily from your analogy. Like if the algorithm is the way that our communication infrastructure is built nowadays, then the same way that we regulated radio, regulated television, regulated newspaper ownership. For a long time, there were rules that you couldn't have the same company own the television station and the newspaper in the same city for obvious reasons. Now you have one or two companies that are just owning absolutely all of the means of communication. So if that's the case, then okay, then we as a public have a right to determine, what inputs we want into this algorithm. Yeah,
I think we're adjusting to the centrality of these products in everyday life, and I don't think we're doing it particularly well. And I think part of that is because Silicon Valley was caught off guard in their sort of quest for immense power, that they actually were able to obtain it and in fairly short order. And so it's now as though you have people that their platform is sort of like a newspaper or like radio, and it makes them feel like they have blood on their hands because it's easily used by authoritarian leaders, and so they now are not equipped really. And I don't even know that our government at this point is equipped to handle this better than Silicon Valley. And so it's a real mess, and we continue to see no signs from Facebook. That's what the story I think fundamentally gets to, is we're not seeing any signs from Facebook that it's capable of self-correcting in a helpful way.
And like you said, it's shocking that a guy who built a website, who started a website based on the idea of whether or not his co-eds were hot or not, can't figure out how to run the world.
Isn't it surprising?
He still has time to figure it out, hopefully, but we will tell you what's on our radars up next.